Welcome back to the Disturbed Chronicles. My name's Cams, and I'm glad you're here because today's video we're going to talk about New York and their top 5 most notorious serial killers. New York leads the nation with 18 documented serial killers and with 677 total victims. This is just the known information, and it could always be more, right? New York has the most serial killers, but not the most victims. I've actually shown this photo in a previous video, which shows the total number of victims per state. California has the most overall victims, and New York has the most documented serial killers. And some believe this is based off of the dense population in New York. And they, are a huge tourist attractions considering iconic landmarks that they have, like the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building. So we're going to start off the top 5 with Rex Heerman, aka the Long Island serial killer. Netflix released a documentary on Rex called Gone Girls, and this was right after I actually had started my research on these serial killers, which is a huge coincidence because I had no idea that they were doing that, so I of course had to add Rex to this list. It was actually a really good documentary, so if you guys haven't watched it on Netflix, check it out. It's called Gone Girls. Now, Rex is being charged with 7 counts of murder and is currently pleading not guilty. Rex is said to be responsible for the Gilgo 4 and 3 other women. Rex was arrested in 2023 in connection to the 4 victims found on Gilgo Beach in Long Island, and Rex has been held without bond since his arrest in summer of 2023, but has since been charged with 3 more counts of murder, totaling up to 7 murder charges as of today. His last charge was added in December 2024, and police suspect Rex could be responsible for even more. His first known victim was in 1993, and it extended all the way through 2011. The victims were tied up, they were mutilated and dismembered, and several of them were actually sex workers. And this is ultimately why people believe there was so much negligence on the police's side due to the length of the time that these bodies were in the elements. Most of these victims' cause of death couldn't even be determined other than it being a homicide, or at least that's what the police said. I think a lot of that was them trying to cover up some of that negligence. Law enforcement actually issued several subpoenas to search Rex's property, and they discovered several searches and documents on his devices, and they found a planning document for murder, which talked about body prep, removing head and hands, fingerprints, and DNA. Among several other disturbing things, they even found pornography related to children on his computer. Reportedly, Rex used his victims' phones to call their family members and taunt them after their deaths. And this was really unbelievable for anybody who knew Rex because he was an architect and a typical family man. He had a wife and kids, and he did a normal commute to work and to home. And everyone said he had to have been living a double life. Rex's wife filed for divorce in 2023 and is said to have no knowledge or involvement in any of these murders. Rex still maintains his innocence for all 7 charges, and his attorney actually defends his non-guilty verdicts. Of course he does. Rex is now 61 years old and is still awaiting trial. Eventually, he will face trial and we will have another update and more details. But I think Rex is 100% guilty based off of everything that I've read, and especially off of the documentary released on Netflix. Imagine being one of his kids. Prayers for his family because that's gotta be rough. And I hope that he gets convicted for these murders and their families can have a little bit of justice. Number 2 on this list is none other than Joel Rifkin, aka Joel the Ripper. Joel has 9 confirmed victims, but he's confessed to 17 murders. Joel's known for dismembering his victims and scattering their body parts around different locations. He would pull out their teeth and cut off their fingertips. This way, they could not be identified. Some of these victims' remains have actually never been found. And his victims were between the ages of 20 and 30 years old. Joe was adopted, and he had it rough his whole life. never really fitting in anywhere he went. He was bullied in school. And although Joel has an IQ of over 128, he still suffered from learning disabilities, and he struggled to get good grades. Eventually, Joel became violent and would think about strangling women. And he started taking a liking to sex workers, which is what most of his victims were. His first victim was in 1989, and he claimed at least 8 more by 1993. Joel had his own landscaping business, and he used that to his advantage by preying on vulnerable women. And he used the rented job sites and vehicles to hide his victims' bodies. Reportedly, Joel used an X-Acto knife to dismember one victim. He bludgeoned one with a table leg before dismembering them, and the police had a hard time identifying Joel's victims because of the way that they were dismembered. In June of 1993, the police tried to stop Joel because he didn't have a license plate on his vehicle. But instead of pulling over, he continued for about another 20 minutes or so, leading the police on a high-speed chase, which ended with Joel crashing into a light pole. And afterwards, when the police searched Joel's vehicle, they found a body of a sex worker inside of his truck. This would be Joel's last victim before he was apprehended. And by 1996, Joel was found guilty for 9 counts of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 200 years in prison. Joel was held in solitary confinement, often for about 23 hours a day, due to him having conflicts with other inmates. Joel was said to be disruptive, and he tried to sue the prison because he felt his constitutional rights had been violated. But the court ruled in favor of the prison, and Joel actually tried to appeal his convictions for the 9 murders, but those appeals have been denied. Joel is now 66 years old, and he is still in prison. And number 3 on this list is Mary Beth Tinning, aka the baby murderer. Mary Beth is much different than any other person that we've talked about on here, and that's because she's known for killing all of her children back in the 1970s and 80s. She had 9 victims, but was only charged with 3, and all 9 of those victims were her children. Initially, the cause of her children's death was considered to be a genetic thing, but her first child's death occurred in 1972 and was born with many issues. This child only lived a week and actually never left the hospital. 2 weeks later, Mary brought her 2-year-old son to the hospital, and she stated that he had had a seizure and, in result, choked on his own vomit. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with the child, so he was released and sent back home with Mary, only to be brought back 2 hours later, but this time her son was dead upon arrival. His cause of death was ruled cardiac arrest, and a few months later, Mary brought her 5-year-old daughter to the hospital due to convulsions. This child died the next day after being in a coma for several hours. Her death was attributed to Reye syndrome. In November of 1973, Mary gave birth to a boy, and just a few weeks later, Mary brought her now dead son back to the hospital, and she said she found him lifeless in his crib, and his death was actually attributed to SIDS. Mary's 5th son was born in 1975, and he also died shortly after. She stated he was found dead in the car while she was out running errands. Mary adopted a newborn boy in 1978, and her 6th daughter was also born very shortly after. At just 3 months old, Mary brought her daughter to the hospital, which was right across the street from her apartment conveniently, and Mary stated her daughter had a seizure, but the doctors were actually able to revive her. This was reported aborted SIDS. But a month later, Mary brought her daughter back to the hospital, and she was in full cardiac arrest. The doctors yet again were able to revive her, but this time she had irreversible brain damage. And ultimately, Mary chose to remove her daughter off of life support just 2 days later. In 1979, Mary's 8th son died in the hospital while on life support, and his cause of death was labeled undetermined. In 1981, Mary's adopted son was brought to the hospital with a concussion after falling down the steps. Mary said he wouldn't wake up, but he was actually already dead upon arrival. And at this point, they believed that all of Mary's children's deaths were attributed to a genetic thing. But because her adopted son mysteriously dies as well, that was no longer suspected. In 1985, Mary's last child died from asphyxiation, and now social services meets with Mary because all of her children's deaths were listed undetermined, SIDS, or by natural causes. And Mary was interrogated by the police, and she actually ended up signing a document stating she killed her 9th child. But she later retracted this statement, saying that she was forced into it by the police. Mary was charged with the death, considering the autopsy stated his cause of death was by smothering. The cause of death of her other 8 children was ruled suspicious after this discovery, and the jury found her guilty on 3 counts of depraved heart murder, which basically means they didn't believe that she killed with the intent to actually kill. Mary spent 31 years in prison and was denied parole several times because of her lack of remorse that was shown. She was finally released in 2018 at the age of 76. And her ex-husband was actually even poisoned by her and was hospitalized with life-threatening injuries. He did survive, and for some reason he never pressed charges, but he knew that Mary poisoned him. Every single one of her 9 children died at the hands of Mary, and that's no coincidence. Now for number 4 on the top 5 is Richard Angelo, aka the Nurse of Death. Richard has 4 known victims with 1 attempt and 32 more suspected back in the 1980s. He was known for injecting his patients with a paralytic agent used in anesthesia. This would cause paralysis and was an elaborate plan that he made to make himself seem like the hero. He would inject his patients and then he would call for help, remarkably knowing exactly what to do in order to save these people's lives. And this would earn him admiration from his colleagues and from some of the patients. But unfortunately, this didn't always work out, and 25 out of the 37 of Richard's patients did not survive. Coworkers started to get suspicious after a while, being the fact that Richard was always around when these emergencies happened, and one of Richard's patients actually saw him injecting something suspicious into their IV, and this 73-year-old patient reported that to a nurse. The contents were analyzed and revealed that Richard was using a type of muscle relaxer in which the patient fell very ill after this injection. And this prompted the police to be called, and they received a statement from this patient. And they described how that person looked, which was Richard, and he was the only one that fit that description. Richard was arrested for assault on this patient, and he actually admitted to poisoning several other patients when being interrogated. Richard admitted to his low self-esteem and his lack of confidence, and he felt inadequate and used these heroic situations to gain positive feedback and attention. That patient actually testified against Richard for what they saw, along with 32 other witnesses. And in 1988, he was indicted for several counts of murder and assault. The defense argued that Richard didn't know how lethal those injections were going to be, and they were asking for a lesser sentence for Richard. The prosecutor stated that maybe Richard didn't kill with intent, but he just didn't give a damn. And it took the jury 8 days to deliberate. They finally came back with a guilty verdict for 8 counts, including murder, manslaughter, assault, and criminal negligent homicide. He was sentenced to 61 years in prison, but the maximum sentence at the time was 50 years per state law. So Richard is still in prison today, and he's 62 years old. He will be eligible for parole in 2049 at the age of 87. This is why a lot of people don't trust hospitals or nurses, because you never know what someone's true intentions are. Last but certainly not least on this list is Harrison Graham, aka the Cookie Monster Killer. Harrison had 7 known victims, and he was known to be an easygoing man, but he had an intellectual disability, which caused Harrison to struggle in school. And in the 1970s, Harrison worked in construction, and he lived in an area with high poverty and crime. It said that Harrison spent a lot of time with pimps and prostitutes, and he began heavy drinking along with frequent heavy drug use. Harrison was a tall man with an athletic build and was never considered to be violent, but he rented an apartment with mostly vacant spaces around him, and reports say that he turned his apartment into a drug den, and people would often come by his place to use drugs or to purchase drugs. And not much of his information is given about the actions of the cause of death to these 7 victims. But in 1987, Harrison was evicted from his apartment due to foul smells coming from his apartment. Inside, the police would find the remains of 6 women. They found a naked woman on the mattress, dead, and they could tell that it had been there for a while. And nearby was another corpse of a woman laying on a pile of trash. A third set of remains was wrapped in 2 sheets under a bunch of stuff just laying around. This body was nearly skeletal, so it had to have been there for a really long time. They found the 4th set of remains mummified inside of some sheets yet again, and the 5th body was found between 2 mattresses. And the police wondered if this was the mattress that Harrison actually slept on, due to the way that this corpse was smushed. The 6th set of remains was found in a small pocket of the house, wrapped up in another sheet with a cord around their neck. The 7th set of remains was actually found on the roof and was partially dismembered. The only items Harrison took with him after the eviction was some clothes, a water bottle, and his Cookie Monster puppet that he loved dearly. People said Harrison liked to play basketball with the local kids, and he would talk to the Cookie Monster puppet, especially when he was drunk. And when Harrison was arrested after being located on the streets, he openly admitted to the murders and showed remorse. He never gave much detail about these killings other than stating things escalated while having sex and being on heavy drugs. He did, however, admit to about 24 murders. Harrison was never diagnosed with schizophrenia, but when interviewed, Harrison said Marty killed the women, who was one of his personalities. He was said to have 3, Marty, Frank, and Junior, who was a 2-year-old boy that loved that Cookie Monster puppet. A few women testified against Harrison, and they said that they barely survived him. These women stated that they were choked aggressively while having intercourse, and one witness actually stated that Harrison told her he killed one of his girlfriends out of anger. Ultimately, in 1987, Harrison was found guilty on 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of desecrating a corpse. So he was actually having sex with these dead corpses. When Harrison's guilty verdict was announced, he just shook his head and he asked for his Cookie Monster puppet back. Harrison was likely insane, and nobody was sure if he knew right from wrong or if he actually understood his guilty verdict. Harrison was sentenced to death, but this charge was later changed to life imprisonment based off of his low IQ level of only 70 and his mental state. He wasn't deemed competent enough to be executed, and during his imprisonment, he became an ordained minister. An article stated Harrison died in prison back in 2022, and a lot of articles have different information about these people, being the fact that DNA testing was in the early stages for most of these serial killers. It's hard to really say what's true and what's not true, but what is certain is that all of these killers took people's lives, and they definitely deserve to be punished. Is it just me, or do women get lighter sentences? You know, from the research that I've done reading about all these different serial killers, it seems that women do receive a lot of lighter sentences. And I even looked it up because I was so interested in it. And it actually showed that men receive sentences that are 34% longer according to studies. Gender bias in sentencing is a real thing. What do you guys think about this? If you like this video, make sure you drop a comment and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe. Hopefully I'll see you guys on the next disturbing video.